Hello and welcome to DSP Leaders World Forum 2021. Coming up now is our Challenges and Opportunities Roundtable, where we'll be discussing the pros and cons of open DSP architectures. We are at a critical point in the evolution of telecoms networks. On the one hand, it is so encouraging to see service providers getting on board with Open Telco ideals, as well as vendors, most of them, and policymakers. But there's still plenty of doubt and uncertainty around. Will those aspiring to create truly open digital services providers create the blueprint for the future of our industry? Or is this all just wishful thinking? Well, let's find out what our special guests think, and I'm delighted to introduce Franz Seiser, who is VP for Access Disaggregation at Deutsche Telekom, Dr. Mike Short, Chief Scientific Advisor, Department for International Trade with the UK Government, Alex Reznik, Outgoing Chair of the ETSI MEC ISG and Distinguished Technologist at HPE, and Rick Hamilton, Senior Vice President of Ciena's Blue Planet software. Hello everyone and welcome to our State of the Industry debate on the Open Telco. Now during this session I'm going to put a few topical statements to you all. My colleague Ray Lemaitre and I drew up these talking points based on the feedback from our TelecomTV community. So contentious, perhaps, but certainly relevant and indicative of what our viewers are asking us about. So let's hear our first statement then. Far from being an attractive economic option for telcos, an open architecture will lead to greater costs due to increased interoperability, testing, integration, and deployment issues. Now, hoping you can all answer this one, but Franz, let me start with you because I introduced you first to our audience. What do you make of that? Do you think that such an architecture actually, far from being cost effective, comes with a lot of additional cost for telcos?
It comes with additional complexity, but additional complexity, if you deal with it smartly, and we have to, should not lead to additional cost. I would even say must not lead to additional cost. So it's of course, if you disaggregate and put things in smaller pieces and then you put them back together again, of course you need to take care and make sure things work. And as you said, there are many APIs you need to verify. But nobody said, and I think that's not the basic idea, that every telco who wants to implement that starts from scratch and does everything itself. So of course, it's all about community and collaboration. That's why we have all these community activities out there that take care that things work together as flawlessly as possible. So of course you have the final piece, and adapting to the specific use case is something we need to take care about, but that's something we do today as well. But of course the expectation is there is a kind of pre-integration already happening as a community effort across all the players, because it's the only way from my perspective that a smaller software-only player can play a significant role in the rather big overall ecosystem we need to put up our services and provide it in the required quality. So yes, additional complexity, but if you deal with it smartly, and of course things like automation also come in place here, we strongly believe that in the long term and overall it will definitely lead to lower cost, not higher cost.
Okay, thank you, Franz, for that. I wonder what our other guests think. Rick, maybe I could start with you. Are we simply replacing one set of costs with another like-to-like set of costs here?
I'm not sure I'd view it that way. I think, as Franz said, it's sort of a matter of perspective. When do you think about cost, and how do you think about opportunity cost and the cost of capital? So like anything in technology, one sort of architecture is never going to fit anybody. But I tend to agree with him that the likely problem will be in the short term, there'll be some complexities, some new challenges to deal with. But long term, having more disaggregation, more open sort of architectures provides for greater choice. It provides hopefully for easier upgrades and evolution of technology without massive retroactive changes. So there's a lot of attractive long-term benefits to a more open architecture. And it's difficult to do with technology, but I think if we look over the long term, it's going to be better for everybody. It's sort of how I view it.
Thanks, Rick. Alex, so should we be looking at taking a long-term view on this one? We shouldn't get too fixated with any short-term spikes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you definitely need to take a look at that long-term view. The initial transition into a different way of doing things is always costlier at that initial point. But at the end of the day, so much of the cost is in the operations, which are naturally long-term. And as we've seen throughout the rest of the technology world, a transition to an open approach, a transition to an approach that allows you to pick the best of breed, to operate things in a way that makes sense to your business, always at the end of the day results in both lower costs, but also potentially being able to address new opportunities much faster and much more efficiently, right? So you also win on the revenue side of that equation in the long term.
Thanks, Alex. Mike, what's your perspective here? Because you've seen a lot of technology changes and evolutions here, and this being the latest one.
So before I joined the government, I worked for Telefonica and its predecessors for 30 years. And we've actually seen open architectures since the days of 2G and GSM. What we're now seeing is a much greater openness because of softwareization and standards. And that's extremely helpful when it comes to both cost reduction, but also time to market, the ability to deliver new products and services more quickly. We have had open architectures in areas like distribution and billing for quite some time. So it's good to see it's coming to the network world. I think we've also, as operators, and I was an operator once, we've ingested ideas as they've come along. So the Wi-Fi activity alongside cellular from the days of the smartphone from 2007 onwards. So I think the move towards openness is good. I think the move towards open data is great. But I think the standards basis is absolutely key to minimize any complexity and to maximize the opportunities for cost reduction. Again, horses for courses, need the right blend of talent for the 21st century.
Thanks, Mike. Well, thank you all. Let's move on to our next point here, and that is we've been looking at the issue of security, the all-important matter of security. Now, the more vendors you have in the network, the more interconnect points there are, and the more opportunities there are perhaps for security breaches. Or to put it more simply, is an open network more inherently insecure? So are we increasing the risk of security issues as we go along the open route? Rick, I'm going to come to you first because I think you're going to shake your head vigorously at this one.
Yeah, no, I don't. Look, I think the tidal wave of security is upon us, and the number of vendors you have in your network, while interesting, doesn't, in my mind, solve the fundamental problem. I mean, if you think about forget open architectures for a minute, if you think about the promise of things like 5G, a big push to sort of edge computing, and certainly the proliferation of applications and devices at the edge of the network, there's where the real security problem exists. And I think it requires a holistic and different approach. Think of things like sort of a zero trust posture in your network. So I think it's I believe it to be short-sighted to say, well, if you have more vendors through these open architectures, you're going to have a bigger security risk. It's coming. In fact, it's already here today, just with the proliferation of devices and the advancements of our ability to put connectivity way out to the edge. We've got to think about this differently. So it's an argument that I tend to kind of say wrong question for the wrong answer, if you know what I mean. But that's how I view it.
Great, thanks. Alex, please.
So I'll add to that. I think there's kind of a misnomer here, right? That or miss idea that when you go from a single vendor or a few vendors to an open architecture, because you have so many different entities bringing pieces together, you're now increasing your security risk. But when the telcos used to buy and still do, right, very highly integrated appliances, those appliances are put together from many, many different components. essentially many different vendors, sometimes in reality different vendors, right? But sometimes even if it's just different groups within a single large organization. From a security point of view, these are pieces that are being brought together. The difference with an open architecture is you have a well-defined, well-thought-through interfaces at where those pieces are being put together. You also have visibility into what's going on there, understanding of what's going on there. So you actually have better information to both build a more secure system and address and mitigate security risks as they come up once the system is operational. In an open architecture than you would have in a closed architecture, where you, as the entity that at the end of the day operates the stuff, you really have no information and no visibility and no access into some of the key interfaces that your attackers might be exploiting, right? So I think it's actually the opposite way around. I think an open architecture, when properly understood and looked at from a security point of view, with the right security stance, like a zero trust approach to everything, gives you a much more secure network.
Thank you, Alex. And we will be coming back to those points about the ecosystem and also interfaces a bit later on in our discussion. Mike, do you see the same thing here? Do you see that actually what this is actually giving us is greater visibility?
I think it's giving us more solutions as well as visibility. And I think if you have more suppliers, you have more ideas that can help you. But I'd like to just apply the lens of the customer and the regulator. I think from the customer point of view, the customer will expect no different in an open architecture world to today's world. If anything, he would expect improvements. So from a customer viewpoint, it's quite important to reassure the customer. From a regulatory point of view, and operators are regulated, we also need to take the regulator with us. And the regulator often measures things like security attacks or malware, and also the resilience of networks. So again, the regulator needs to be taken with you on this journey. So it brings great opportunities with security, new ideas, but we need to take certain stakeholders, such as customers and regulators, with us on this journey.
Thanks, Mike. And Franz, is disaggregation and this proliferation of vendors and choice actually assisting with security matters?
Yes. So when I talk to my security experts, the very first thing they tell me, it's not only a wrong, but a very dangerous assumption, believing a closed system is more secure than an open system. As already explained, in an open system with open interfaces, many more people can look at it. You can much easier verify if things go wrong there. In a closed system, most likely you don't even recognize. You may recognize something is behaving strangely, but you have no means to verify and to figure out, because you don't understand the system internally. So this believing something you don't understand is secure is, as I said, a very, very dangerous assumption. So the openness is clearly helpful based on a couple of key assumptions, as I think also already very well explained. So the APIs and interfaces need to be well understood, well documented, and can be tracked easily. And then you should be able to isolate the source of risk much easier going forward, always taking into account how complex the overall systems are we are operating here.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for that. This next point, I'm going to address, come straight back to you, Franz, on this one, because it's very much telco focused, and it's something that we hear about a lot on TelecomTV. Our audience is talking to us about this quite a lot. That is, open architectures promise more diversity in the supply chain, but vendors are smart, and those who've already got the extensive supply contracts aren't going to give way easily, and they may bundle or pre-integrate components, or they may buy out the emerging competition. We're seeing both of these things happening already. So telcos will mostly end up working with exactly the same suppliers as they do now. Is this just really another way for telcos to put a bit of pricing pressure and cut costs on their existing vendors?
Of course, cost is always a topic for us. That's I think, well known. But Disaggregation is much more. It's yes, and it's honestly it's good news if we see the existing suppliers are going down that route as well, and they may very well be in an excellent position to cover a broad range of cases. But it's always a question: where are the leading and where not? Yeah, if you go with a big supplier, you always have to compromise at some point in time because, as I said, the system itself is so complex and so many different components need to come together. It's a bit hard to believe that there is one single company that can be the best in all the aspects. And openness gives me exactly the opportunity to work in certain cases with more advanced companies, working more tailor-made cases. Also keep in mind if there are only a few suppliers providing solutions for the whole world, so to say, they always need to compromise. Yeah, they cannot implement all these nitty-gritty special cases that are around, which are so important for us to differentiate. And different markets have different priorities, and then what goes well in one market may not go so well in the other market. But if you only have a few suppliers, you either convince one of them to do it, or it takes your time. And that's exactly this aspect of speed and being able to provide new solutions in much faster time. That's exactly the sweet spot where you start working with smaller suppliers and smaller companies, which if you have an open architecture, you can easily plug in your overall system. If few of them hopefully manage to become really relevant suppliers for the overall ecosystem, what I very much hope, as we had that situation some time ago, as some of us for sure remember, that would be, of course, the best case. But that's, of course, something the market will decide. It depends on what products they're delivering, how reliable they are, how good they react. So the typical market mechanics, of course, will come in. On the point of takeover, yeah, that's of course a difficult one. If there would be a good recipe to that, of course, that would be good. I mean, we know in many industries takeovers are sometimes an issue because they happen because of different motivations, where it's hard to do a lot. But of course, there's something we hopefully find some ways to avoid that every promising small company is taken over more or less immediately, but difficult.
Thanks very much, Franz. Well, let's go straight to our two vendors on our roundtable today and see what they're thinking so far about these open telco architectures and models. Alex, let me come to you first. Obviously, this is a big opportunity, but do you think things will really change? Do you think opportunities will increase?
Yeah, I mean, I think the focus on big companies and take over smaller companies is a bit wrong. I think what you got to focus on is whether you're driving innovation into the market, how broad of an innovation, and how fast that innovation is being driven. And I think clearly in our industry, the last, let's say, decade, the speed and the rate of innovation, the way people try to do things very differently has increased tremendously. And a lot of it is being driven by open architectures across everything that we do in telco, right? And that creates opportunities for small companies. Now, we have to remember, right? Small companies, if they succeed, they become large established vendors. So to me, I don't know that it's that important whether a successful new entrant becomes large by being absorbed into a legacy player, but thereby really changing the way that legacy player approaches the market, or whether they do it organically and they grow to be a large company, right? What's important is going back and looking at, have we been successful in driving the speed of innovation? And I'd say in the last If you look at the telco space over the last 10 years, the answer is absolutely yes, and to a very significant degree, that's driven by open architectures across the board.
Thanks, Alex. And Rick, what do you feel on this one?
Yeah, I think Alex is right. I mean, I agree that for me, I think the most important change will come in the fact that as these open architectures get adopted, and I think we all believe that they will, it creates an opportunity for choice, and choice drives a competitive behavior, and competitive behaviors bring innovation to the market. It forces the big, network equipment providers, even Ciena being one of them, to really think long and hard about where they're spending money, where they can be the best for an overall solution, what is their real core competency, and redirect those capital dollars into that innovation. I don't think we can lose sight of the fact, I guess I'm biased because I've spent maybe the past 20 years of my career working for the big vendors, Cisco and Ciena and others. We've put billions and billions of dollars into R&D that have really driven important innovations into the market. And, we don't want to lose that for sure. But I think the open architectures will, as Alex said, it'll give people the ability to make choices based on what part of the architecture are they working on, what problems are they trying to solve, and who could be the best in the market. I think that will only put the big vendors on notice. They'll have to continue to drive innovation to be competitive. And as given the pace that technology is moving at, that competitive, innovative drive is going to help everybody. So I really see this as a positive for the entire industry. It's going to allow the small guys to get in and really disrupt, and it's going to force the big players to really, think carefully about where they're spending their R&D dollars to drive the biggest impact.
Thank you, Rick. Yes, it's very interesting that maybe it does force the larger vendors to focus on their core competencies, as you say. Mike, do you think we'll really get an uptick in innovation, especially from new entrants, smaller companies, maybe spin-offs from academia?
I think we're already getting an uptick. There are more companies interested in 5G currently than we've seen in previous generations. It's true that there are some significant large vendors in the mix, but there are many startups that are interested. And that's because we're now in a world of a digital economy. It's no longer just about networks. It's also about applications. It's also about cross-sector activity. I was looking at some fintech companies the other day, some insurtech and some health tech companies. And they are using mobile as if it's always been with us. The reality is that open architecture and open standards helps to give us faster routes to market for many industries. It also helps to differentiate between perhaps one operator and another should they wish to do that. It also needs to be looked at alongside other measures that are being considered. So we're seeing a growth and interest in site sharing and network sharing and even some neutral host sites. So we need standards that can work in a different way to, say, 20 years ago. Standards that are more open and more flexible, but recognizing that capital, the investment required, is just not growing on trees. So I think overall, open standards and open architecture are the only way forward.
Thank you, Mike. And this leads us very nicely into our next statement that we've been discussing with our audience. And it refers to something that certainly Alex mentioned earlier. An open architecture relies on APIs, and maintaining consistent open APIs across the whole communications networking ecosystem will simply prove not to be possible. This has been really difficult so far. Various organizations are still really pushing this, but complete industry support and avoiding fragmentation and different versions of implementations is tricky. Alex, do you think we'll achieve this?
Yes, and so I am completing my term as chair of ETSI MAC. And it's a standards body that defines some of the key APIs in the MAC space. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And the answer is absolutely yes. And we've done it as an industry consistently. I mean, look, APIs are interfaces, right? They're A, P, and then I stands for interface. Standardized interfaces where you need global consistency and interoperability, that's their job. This industry has been super successful at doing that. 3GPP, right? It's at the end of the day, it's an interoperability interface standards as head of standards. 802.11 for Wi-Fi, right? Global wireless LAN standard. IP, right? It's an interface protocol between two devices, right? So the industry has done it successfully. Where there was a need for global consistency, that has always been arrived at, and I have no doubt that we're going to do it for the areas where it's necessary, right? So the only thing that we'll find out is where the market demands it and where the market does not demand it. If the market does not demand that kind of consistency, then it's not going to happen, but it's not needed.
All right, a very positive response there. Let's see, Rick, what's your take? I mean, there will always, surely there'll always be some more bespoke and interesting implementations of interfaces that just happen.
Yeah, it just happens. But I tend to agree with Alex. The industry has proven this out, many times over the past couple of decades, and he listed a number. We actually see, in our space from Blue Planet, software automation, machine learning, it is absolutely dependent upon the development of these standards, because if they don't start to emerge, the hopes that we have around, just what I would consider to be basic and core automation are going to fail. If those things fail, the adoption of these advanced technologies like 5G, what's going to happen with the edge, they're going to risk, an adoption problem. So I think it's almost a must, right? These standards are going to emerge. And they're going to change the game for everybody. I do think the pace at which they emerge is the open question. And it's the age-old problem. If all of the vendors in the world today and some of the service providers get together and try to debate these standards over and over again, we'll have an elongated time frame really to find a place where they're having an impact. If the CSPs, the DSPs can start to come together, as the consumer of these interfaces and these standards, they'll greatly increase the pace at which we can adopt them. And, that's one worry we have. Can the major telcos around the world really come together and agree upon a base set of standards? And I think they will. And when they do, we won't be asking this question anymore. We'll be looking at sort of the innovation that will be driven through their use. Sort of how I see that playing out.
Great. Well, let's ask Franz. How is it going with Deutsche Telekom and the other major telcos, the tier ones? Are you getting together to get a accord here, an agreement?
Yeah, we have to. So I very much agree. My philosophy: wherever there is substantial benefit, we will have a unique set or a dominant set of APIs. I wouldn't go as far as saying unique, but a very dominant one. The price to pay, of course, it takes time. Agreeing, the more players you have, the more difficult it gets to agree. What is it? But if it's worth the effort and it's very obvious you have to do it, then it happens. And as I said, I mean, the best and most successful example we have is definitely 3GPP. Otherwise, we couldn't use our mobile phones and all the networks across the world. And we are building on that. Do we need it everywhere? No, because as I said, it makes you slow. So it of course, if you first need to agree on an API on global basis, and only then you can build of it, you have to wait. So usually you start to innovate without that. But if things matter, then it will come and will be put. And we do that. Yeah, we work together. As some of you for sure have recognized, we just did sign and publish an MOU between a couple of major players in Europe regarding O-RAN, with a clear intention, if you read the MOU, that we will, as next step, now work on a so-called tech priority document, where we exactly start to figure out what are these priorities we need to jointly work on across the operators to make sure that this disaggregated architecture has a fair chance to grow. And all the players in that ecosystem know exactly what they need to do, how they can contribute, and the things fit together in the end to minimize the friction in the early days of that new technology.
Yeah, that certainly was a welcome move recently from those four telcos. Mike, it's a trade-off, isn't it, as to which of the key APIs we need to spend time getting right and sorting out, and the need also to, the increasing need to move fast and be agile.
Yes, it's a prerequisite, but I think it should be demand-driven by the operators and indeed the broader community. But let me just go back to something very simple. GSM and the subsequent generations have been based on standards which deliver economies of scale and shared R&D. So therefore, many users benefit from the lowering of unit costs. We wouldn't get 1.3 to 1.5 billion smartphones being shipped every year if we didn't have standards. We wouldn't have close to 300 million 5G customers at the end of 2020 were it not for standards. So actually, what I see these APIs is an increase to the range of standards, adding more capability and capability to all users and operators in the mix. We also need to think about this in a data world type way. And of course, it's no longer just about voice. There are many more options in the data world. So I think we need to embrace the internet. I think we need to embrace fixed line communications, and we should be promoting the best use of standards, including new APIs when they come along and give real benefit.
Thanks, Mike. Well, a final statement before we wrap up this discussion to discuss. We want to look now beyond the physical network and towards the commercial objectives. The more a telco goes down the DSP route and looks to digital services, income and revenue, the more they lose focus on their core strength, i.e. connectivity, and therefore the more they put their futures at risk. So it's a contentious one, this, from our audience. It's really looking at, should a telco head more towards digital services provision, or should it double down on its basically core connectivity strengths? And this ties in with this need for the open network, the Open Telco. The Open Telco is all about opening up and creating more opportunities out there, especially with DSPs. So, Franz, do you feel that the Open Telco and what we've been talking about naturally leads itself towards digital services provision? And is there a risk that we take our eye off our core strengths, our connectivity?
Actually, I don't see that. Exactly the opposite. So our ambition, of course, is to use all these principles of open architectures to better monetize our connectivity-based product. So it's, of course, our key product is, no discussion, is about providing best possible connectivity and having an open, flexible software architecture on top, being able to control your connectivity product via such an open architecture and providing APIs opens completely new capabilities how to monetize that. So this is not diluting us. The opposite, we are using that to have better opportunities to even strengthen our position in that field.
Thank you, Franz. Let's go around for our final comments. Alex, do you feel that all this work we're doing on Open Telco is actually, as Franz says, helping us to monetize what we've already got, monetize our connectivity?
Yeah, and I'll bust TelecomTV's chops a bit on this one. I mean, what this question really says is a large business like a telco can't focus on two adjacent areas at the same time. One always comes at the expense of the other, and I just don't. We've got plenty of examples where that's not true, especially when the areas are so interconnected, right? What we're driving towards and what telcos are going to be in the middle of is a highly distributed, very powerful edge cloud. Now, when you go today and you go into any major cloud provider or Google and Amazon, or Microsoft, right, and you start setting things up, what is one of the first things that you wind up setting up within the context of their centralized cloud? Your virtual virtual cloud, which is essentially the virtual network that interconnects the various virtual pieces that you have in there, right? So in a digital world, the networking piece is absolutely critical to the extent that you have to create one whenever you start any reasonable cloud project in a virtual sense, right? So as we go to a highly distributed edge network that we all agree is going to drive this next generation of technologies, that connectivity is the core on which everything else gets built, right? So it's not, I don't think anyone is taking their eyes off the connectivity piece.
Alex, I can't do two things at once, so that's why I'm highly skeptical that telcos can do two things at once. Mike, it's a very good point, this, isn't it? We can do two things at once. We're more than capable of this. It's not an either-or choice here. There's connectivity and there's richer digital services out there.
Yes, exactly. The premise of the question, I think, is wrong. I think operators, particularly mobile operators, are much more than just connectivity, even though that is a vital ingredient. If we look to some markets, we can see they're really strong on security or optimizing the secure communications for key customers. We can see in other markets that they're really strong on mobile money transfer. In other markets, we can see they're really strong on mobile media. Now, that's not in every country, that's true, and that's partly about market phasing. But I think what we can see with open standards is that new markets are opening up. So that's another key reason to embrace open standards and open architecture. Yes, there's some complexity there. Yes, security does need to be addressed, but it provides more opportunities than just sitting still.
Thanks. And Rick, final comment from you. The open telco naturally, therefore, lends itself towards new opportunities for telcos.
Yeah, certainly. And as the rest of the panel has, wisely pointed out, the underlying nature of how networking and connectivity works is going to evolve as these technological use cases evolve. I mean, just think of things like, network slicing in a 5G world, just to pick a cliche that everybody talks about. If a service provider is not actually living the world of delivering those services beyond the connectivity, they're never going to understand fundamentally how that connectivity needs to evolve. So I think it's critical to their future to be in this game. And as was said earlier, finding new ways to monetize that connectivity is going to come through how people are using the technology that hangs off the end of all this connectivity. So it's going to be critical for them to, walk and chew gum at the same time. It's going to be a matter of survival, in my opinion. I don't think it's a choice.
Excellent, Rick. Thank you very much. And with that, we have to draw our discussion to a close. Thank you all very much for participating and sharing your views and opinions today. Now, if you are watching this on day one of our DSP Leaders World Forum, then don't forget to send us any questions or views you have on this subject, and we'll try and answer them in our live after-show program later today. Otherwise, please take a look at all the sessions from this year's World Forum. We are making them available for on-demand viewing throughout the week. Today is focused on the Open Telco, but we are covering 4 other important topics as well as part of this year's event: enhancing the ecosystem, cultural transformation, 5G and sustainability, and DSP revenue streams. We have a great lineup of speakers this year across our roundtables, interviews, and live Q&A programs. So please keep watching and do get in touch with us and let us know your views. For now though, thank you for watching and goodbye.